I think we recently calculated about 50 good people on the right who've worked through periods of time of Brexit Party, now Reform, who've all either looked good, worked good, spoke well, and Nigel has decided they're no longer persona non grata for pretty much similar reasons along the way. But in order to stay in power, in order to be the number one and ensure that his ideas, his policies carry forward, I think there is some sort of Machiavellian need for himself never to be challenged and never look to be challenged. And so that's why he cuts them off at the knees. If you got someone like Elon Musk came in and supported them too, as background chatter is suggesting is a possibility, then that's transformative.
Anyone who is self-respecting and who has something of an ego, because you're right, egos are part and parcel of politics, and has a brief in a certain area, knows a lot about immigration, knows a lot about tech, whatever it knows a lot about social media, whatever it might be, all of those people are going to be instantly put off the very idea of joining Reform because they don't want to be subjected to an HR disciplinary proceeding, and still less subjected to a police investigation. Welcome back to Deprogram. This is the NCF show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, especially among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt. I'm a contributing editor at the European Conservative, a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and I'm thrilled to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, who is one of the leading contributors to Courage Media, and our special guest this week, Steven Woolfe, former MEP and the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Steven, welcome.
Well, thank you, Harrison.
You used to work alongside Mr. Farage back in the UKIP days.
I did.
And I think into the Brexit Party period as well. You're on record saying that the recent spat between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, who I believe you also know reasonably well, is a battle of egos. Whose ego do you think is more operative in the spat?
Oh, without a doubt, Nigel. And let's be clear, I didn't actually work with the Brexit Party. No, Farage made sure that I wasn't permitted to get anywhere near that after my time at UKIP. Not that I'd ever come out and criticised him prior to that, but I was one of the many that he felt had risen too far, seemed to challenge him, and that's exactly what's happened with Rupert Lowe, along with, I think we recently calculated about 50 good people on the right who've worked through periods of time of Brexit Party, now Reform, who've all either looked good, worked good, spoke well, and Nigel has decided they're no longer persona non grata for pretty much similar reasons along the way. So egos, yes, absolutely. You need an ego. Let's be frank about this. You do need an ego to be successful in politics. No one criticises either Nigel or Rupert for having that. I certainly don't. But what you do also need in politics to be successful as a party is a group of individuals with varying talents, from those who are capable of speaking well, to those who are being the thinkers, to those being able to reach out to different parts of the electorate and work as a team, but have a leader that's not worried about the good characteristics or the strength of that individual. That's great leadership, not egotism as a leader.
Why do you think he is so averse to cultivating talent? Because it would seem to me that making sure that he has a really well-oiled team will be conducive to his benefit, both while campaigning and if he gets into government. Any victories that a hypothetical reform government were to put on the board would reflect brilliant on him as the Prime Minister. And the more talented people you have around you, the more victories you're going to put on the board. So why doesn't he, even if he does have an ego which counts against this, why doesn't enlightened self-interest kick in to serve his ego?
That's always been the conundrum. I've always sat back and wondered about that myself. Exactly why does he not take the mantra from the City of London, which he worked on, and as I worked in, where you had chief executives and chairmen who would often say, look, I'm paid very well, but I employ people in this business who I pay a lot more to because they're better at that specific job than I am. And by doing so, the business rises. So Nigel's come from that background, and I ponder upon it on two particular ways. First of all, in the early days of UKIP, where it was a really small bag of individuals coming together, and there would have been some people with good talent and others not, And I think the aggressive nature that's a part of being the strength and the politician that he is probably kicked in, and he felt that there weren't people good enough to be able to do that. So he developed a team around him of loyalists, and he's kept them. Then he recognised that he needed to have certain individuals who were good at specific areas and brought them in, whether they're a funder, whether they're a donor, or individuals along the way. And we've seen that from Kilroy Silk, who was a very articulate individual, to people like Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib, all with specific talents, but he's brought them on. But in order to stay in power, in order to be the number one and ensure that his ideas, his policies carry forward, I think there is some sort of Machiavellian need for himself never to be challenged and never look to be challenged. And so that's why he cuts them off at the knees. But there is the second point, which I think is about those surrounding him. There are those who feel that they need to be with Nigel, feed off Nigel, get a glow from being close to him. And therefore, they become like telltales. They become like the knives in the backs of others by saying, look, you don't want that individual because he's just getting too important, Nigel. And so it feeds off each other. And if they might have other members of the other person's team, let's get rid of them. And so I think those two elements come in. And he has had a coterie of individuals that have stayed with him, some of them particularly well. But we've also noticed there how the Machiavellian streak is capable of just saying, OK, you've been with me 5, 10, 15 years. You're off now as well.
Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
I find it interesting that the response to this reputation destruction attempt against Rupert Lowe has not been one of a principled defence of the process when people have pressed the likes of Ben Habib or Rupert himself on this. Instead, they've said, well, why are you dividing the right? Nigel was the presumptive king. Why would you challenge the throne? And it's strange to me that you would think, one, it's acceptable to call the police on one of your own MPs in pursuit of power come 29.
3 months after the event.
Yeah, quite. And also, two, the idea that if you are the presumptive king of the right, rather than being an Arthurian king assembling a round table of competent knights to go out and defend your respective parts of the realm, that you'd want to be, as I warned he could become in November, which Tice dismissed as delusional garbage, and hey, I'd like to say I called it, King Lear, whose offspring, or siblings, squabbling beneath him and leaving him alone in the wilderness eventually. So I suppose I'm asking with this, is it that politics itself has this Machiavellian strain in it that you need to assassinate people in order to get to the top and there's no other way to do it effectively? Because we have seen this in other parties. Or is it Nigel himself? Or is it the people around Nigel encouraging him to conform to this kind of Machiavellian politics? But is the cart being put before the horse? Or
Well, let's try and break down some of those. I mean, King Lear was a very interesting point because I was looking at that myself and wish I'd seen your previous views on that, because I do think that's quite relevant to this. The sense is that I think historically Nigel needed to protect himself, to build a brand, build himself and get himself in power. Then it comes to the stage of building teams around him and trusting individuals. And that's where it comes to one of the points I've just mentioned, is I think some of his team players are not really to be trusted themselves because they don't have the talent themselves to be able to be up in the front maybe, or they want to protect their own interests. And so they'll try and stab each other, hence the Lear's children. And I think that's also something that I saw very clearly in my days in UKIP and very clearly as the members of the European Parliament. They kept on saying, for example, in my case, why is Stephen always on the television? Why has he got the immigration portfolio? And there'll be people trying to stab you back to be able to get rid of you. Now, is that just solely there for UKIP Reform Brexit Party? Of course not. That's what happens daily in the Labour Party and daily in other political parties too. So that's part of politics. But is it about Nigel's characteristic as well? Yes. Any leader generally wants to stay there as long as possible. He doesn't want to be a decapitated king. And he can either be one that is conducive to staying there for a long time because he's built huge amounts of respect and watching those come along who real seriously want to get rid of him, or he can build that talent pool. And I think he's always been afraid. I think, unfortunately, this is one of his characteristics. He's fearful. He's fearful of what would happen if he's not number one. And he would point to, well, look what happened when I stepped back from UKIP, it imploded. But actually, we now know the implosions that were occurring was partly of his own making. There were people within his team ensuring that happened, give him a gateway to return. But that I don't think is really the kind of relevant point here is the country needs to have a strong party of the right. And that party needs to be in some ways unified. And we have this division between Conservatives, division between Reform. And we really need to have somebody who can challenge the Labour Party exceedingly strongly. Mm-hmm. And so we want unification. But in unification of those views and ideas, you've got to accept that kind of wider spectrum of individuals. Don't do so and you'll fail. No one has ever achieved power by splitting all your colleagues along the way just so that you end up with a smaller minority.
You did say about this trail of corpses. I know you were discussing a few examples on Peter Caldwell's show the weekend just gone. Do you mind outlining a few of those examples, including your own for those who have memory hold those instances?
Yeah. I suppose you start with the original founders of Alan Scared of the UKIP party, and then you move on to the Labour, former Labour MP, the Kilroy Silk, very successful man in his own right, TV show, very successful in the Labour Party, and he joined as an MEP. And there was a time when he looked as though, or wanted to become leader of UKIP at that stage. And the same sort of lines that you're currently seeing with Rupert Lowe, that he's unstable, that he's trying to bring down the party, he's causing division, he's too big for his own boots, are the same lines used then as they are now. After that, you had David Campbell Bannerman, very genial individual, very thoughtful chap, not really a kind of aggressive individual at all. And he just happened to say, I came to the elections of UKIP leadership, I want to stand. Nigel cut him off at the knees and he ended up leaving. Then within the party itself, there were others that we have seen. I've seen Susan Evans, really lovely lady, very clever, very intelligent. Patrick O'Flynn, articulate writer. They supported Susan Evans, and she too was passed aside. Douglas Carswell came in, and if you look back at the newspapers and the articles about Douglas Carswell, same sort of lines and arguments being used against Rupert was used against Douglas as well. Then, of course, you came to Nigel leaving, and you had a very short period with Diane James, who became leader for 15 days. But she was restricted from being able to see the accounts of UKIP. She wasn't being allowed to see all the proper papers of UKIP. So she decided to leave.
Can I just interject there very quickly before you continue the story, because it's it's quite a copious one, sadly, which is rather the theme, I guess. But I remember at the time, I suppose, when did Diane James become leader? Just after Brexit, 2017, maybe?
The end of 2016 August, I think it was.
So I would have been 18 at the time, and I remember listening. I don't know why I remember this, but I remember listening on the radio, and for whatever reason, I actually can't remember the circumstances in which she ended up stepping down, but she ended up stepping down after 15 days. It was somewhat embarrassing for her, and Farage was invited back to become a kind of interim leader again. I remember this, and I remember him being interviewed about this on the radio, and the way he used to talk about his fellow UKIPers at that time, it was almost as though he was a dad who was apologising on behalf of his like disheveled, slightly odd, slightly eccentric, slightly loopy children. And if he could throw a colleague of his or an associate of his, or like Diane James, under the bus, or imply that, oh gosh, I've been trying to run for the hills, I've been trying to get out of this godforsaken organization, but they keep inviting me back because they just can't sort things out. Like, that's the sort of the overall tone that he used to, he is perfectly willing, in the service of his own ego, particularly when going on things like Channel 4, things like, technically what should be regarded as our adversaries, people who really, really don't like us and really, really do not want us to succeed. And he's very happy to sacrifice a colleague, sacrifice an official, in order that his own image remains relatively pristine. And I remember thinking, I actually found it quite funny at the time, because he was more of a lovable figure, because there was no real chance of him being prime minister at that point, and he was just leading ostentatious pressure campaigns. So it didn't really matter if he was a little bit, had his own personal flaws. But once you're trying to go from converting that kind of populist energy, where you can just have one egotistical figurehead, into a practical plan for government, if you're constantly going to be throwing your own personnel under the bus, he did it a little bit with James McMurdoch as well, rather than saying, look, he served time, it's in the past, let's move on. He sort of went, well, I didn't know who he was.
He wouldn't pass vetting now.
Wouldn't pass vetting now, but anyway, we're stuck with him, aren't we? So it's just this whole manner. It may work well when you're a populist pressure campaign, and it may not matter so much, but it becomes very material indeed when you're supposed to be a kind of prime ministerial figure in waiting, and you need to amass a team of capable people around you. Otherwise, your plans for government, and having a right-wing government that actually does things that need to get done in the service of saving this country, is just that the ship of state is just going to crash in the first week.
And I see that. And when you look at Diane James, a very capable woman, you look at Susan Evans, a very capable woman, you look at Patrick Irvine, a very capable man. And there were those who thought I was capable as well. And there was the allegations that I didn't get my papers in on time, which was absolute nonsense. And also the allegations then pressed into place that they were investigating offences against me relating to, I think it was electoral issues at the time, which I remember the senior police officer in Manchester calling me up on holiday, apologising, but they had no choice, and it's the same that Rupert is now.
Could you elaborate on that story?
Yeah, on that one, it was like I'd committed some sort of electoral offence in 2010 related to the, I think, Police and Crimes Commissioners, and so, I do know it was one of the journalists in Channel 4 that was a fan. His name has slipped me at the moment. I had put this out on the press as being investigation of Steven Woolfe by the police.
In 2010 or 2016?
This was 2016, as I'm running for the leadership of UKIP.
Yes.
And what happened there was same as Lowe, is that a journalist rings up the police and says, look, there is this allegation of Steven Woolfe, are you investigating? Well, we don't know anything about it. Then a couple of hours later, another journalist rings up, because it's all pre-planned. How are you investigating? Well, we now know we'll have to investigate. And there becomes the title, investigation.
It's a story.
When the chief of police calls me up and we get the letter and I get it all sent, do you see the same headline saying, oh, there was no investigation, it's exoneration? No, the damage done to the reputation has already been done. And that's part of the shtick. And it's unacceptable to do that. Now, people might say that's the cut and thrust of politics and we should be able to do this. But I don't think it shines well on a political party that does that. And as you say, Connor, now, sending one of your own people as an investigation in front of the police. And I think that will stick, because although at the moment I don't think there'll be any damage to the polling aspects of reform, and I'll come to the reasons why that, overall it will give a vehicle, an opportunity for the opponents of reform to be able to say, is this man really capable of running the country as Prime Minister? And that is the danger for them, the drip effect about it. And why I don't think it's going to impact them at the moment is because it's just not just generally getting out to the populace as a whole. And also the populace as a whole, people are exhausted. When we were in UKIP running for the European Parliament and running to get our referendum, what was called the People's Army was an enthusiastic, energetic, it was passionate. I've just been sent pictures recently of us campaigning outside Chester, and it smiles on people and real energy to get out, because we thought we were going to enact some amazing change. It was our chance to take back control, if you want, from the Vote Leave, give our borders, bring back power. Is that the same enthusiasm today? Is that the enthusiasm that Reform and Farage and Richard Tice have? No. It's desperation. People are desperate for change in this country. They're desperate for someone really to take control of our borders. They're desperate for someone to say, look, we shouldn't be taxed to the hilt. They're desperate to be able to say, we want to be able to have our children not have to be concerned about who they're competing with in sports. We want men and women to be separated from who they are. We want to recognise equality and diversity, but not have it thrust down our throats. We want someone who is passionate about the people. But they say, look at the Conservatives, look at the Labour Party. They've done nothing to make this change. Please reform. Be the last people that can do that. And they're holding on for grim death.
And meanwhile, Lee Anderson's tweeting about fish and chips, and Richard Tice is posting about
Net Stupid Zero, which I'm sure will
catch on
eventually.
Yeah. Don't forget Dominic Frisby's body transformation. That also got a mention on it. So that's very important.
The point that you're making as well is buttressed by, as Ben Habib has pointed out, Reform was polling at 14% before Farage came back. It's about where they finished at, and it's undeniable that Reform had a positive bump in the polls when Farage came back. But let's not forget, they also had another dip when he went on that BBC interview with Nick Robinson and tripped over a fair few carefully laid landmines regarding Ukraine.
Which we should say is a difficult one for him to have to navigate.
Absolutely. And I think that he has probably a better read on the conflict than just the BBC that says that, Putin is Hitler, don't ask any questions, basically. But you can also say that Farage has done his optics blunders, as well as, before Farage, Reform was occupying that abhorred vacuum in politics, where both Labour and Conservatives looks like two cheeks of the same backside. And so Reform stepped in and sucked up all that populist energy. But if I might ask a question on this particular political hit, why do you think it seems to have failed? Because we're now seeing from YouGov, a third of Reform's voters, members, want Farage to go. There's another third of them who are indifferent to whether or not he stays, and another 34% who are die-hard Farage loyalists.
Yes.
It seems to me that this police investigation, which will, in the long-term prospect, put off good candidates from standing.
That's another thing.
You're basically selecting for people that are so compliant, they're willing to have the sword of Damocles of a police call hung over their heads so that they don't usurp Nigel, join the organisation, which means you're cutting off all the talent. Luca Watson's written a very good piece on that. And then two people from Reform said, I've withdrawn my candidacy because of this. You're right. So it's why do you think that has been thwarted by Lowe? Why do you think his career is not as much in the graveyard as some of your former UKIP colleagues is?
I think first and foremost is that he has a stronger presence by being a member of Parliament. Secondly, he's got huge amount of support from within his team and from those within the party to be able to utilise that. Thirdly, I think it's just the blandness and opaqueness of the allegations that were made against. They were so weak and so see-through that people of any sense were able to pick that up straight away, as were many in the media. Now, I know many in the media have started off by attacking this and supporting Rupert, and others are now backing off and being more compliant about saying we've got to keep Nigel there. But I think the strength of the individual and also the way that he's managed it. Rupert's managed it in, apart from one or two tweets, which I think, you can forgive him for. But generally, I think he's managed it in a very well-evidenced, calm and genial way that is the individual that he is. Also, I think people see that, that what happened with Elon Musk saying that Nigel is not the man is a very important factor in this. And this followed very quickly after the decapitation of Ben Habib. And people are going, well, this is not acceptable. And let's look at the numbers. The 34% die hard, I think, are those who for Farage are lots of those who followed him since the beginning. A lot of them in the older age group. He has successfully, or Reform has successfully brought in a lot of younger people in there, but they're actually not bedded in and wedded to this individual, and they see the mistakes.
Yes.
They see the flip-flopping on immigration, in my view, I think very clearly. They don't believe the view that Rupert Lowe is saying we've got to deport everybody that's an immigrant, including second generation or third generation, be kicking me out.
Because he's never said that.
He's never said that. It's not acceptable. What part of me stays? My right arm because it's got the white part stays, and my left arm because it's got the black part removed. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense.
Rupert Lowe deporting Ben Habib personally, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Lift him up on his shoulder, get him off.
Get up a new party together, and then you're out.
Yeah, that's it. It's so absurd. Well, maybe be learning from Nigel on that. That's it. You're a mate. Slap you on the back, off you go. and I think just generally, that is the nonsense about this argument this time around.
Transparently nonsense.
And it's transparently nonsense. Yes. The only difficulty that faces Rupert and Ben is, what do they do next? Is Rupert going to try and genuinely work to get back into reform? But we say from Nigel saying that's not ever going to happen again.
And from Tice, eventually.
And from Tice. So it's an effectively done deal. And where were they going to get the money to formulate a new political party? Now, when I was looking at the leadership, you probably look back in 2019, you needed 1 to 2 million a year annually for a 5-year period just to be able to keep the kind of body of the party going.
Funding. Yeah.
Funding for the party. But in reality, to make a similar impact in the way that Reform was doing, you've got to make 2 to 5 million on that. Who is going to be the donors that actually get in? If you've got someone who's coming in and donates, or promises to donate up to 5 million, then they've got a really strong chance of being able to employ the right individuals, to be able to get the teams behind them, bigger party. If you've got someone like Elon Musk came in and supported them too, as background chatter is suggesting is a possibility, then that's transformative.
And another thing as well is that because Farage is only going to, given that his raison d'etre is pretty transparent by now, and maybe it was to you all along, but it's becoming so more and more, there is a lot of there is a reservoir of untapped talent and energy on the British right. Some of it from all generations, including mine and Connor's. And anyone who is self-respecting and who has something of an ego, because you're right, egos are part and parcel of politics, and has a brief in a certain area, knows a lot about immigration, knows a lot about tech, knows a lot about social media, whatever it might be. All of those people are going to be instantly put off the very idea of joining Reform because they don't want to be subjected to an HR disciplinary proceeding, and still less subjected to a police investigation. And they know that if they if their head rises above the parapet in any way whatsoever, that's likely what's coming down the tracks. So that's another consideration as well. Those people need somewhere to go. And if there were to be an alternative vehicle in British politics, yes, at first it might struggle to garner publicity, but because it would be tapping into that ready-made base of talent, which Farage, not only is Farage neglecting, he's actively persecuting within his own ranks. I'm not being too sort of idealistic here, but I do think it could be a pretty formidable beast in British politics in around 3 years, particularly if it has the Musk bucks, which I think is an important variable. Well, social media is another one. That's something you didn't mention in your answer. No. I'm sure you would agree. Carswell technically had a public presence in Parliament.
Absolutely.
And yet he wasn't really able to resist the ousting, whereas I think the fact that Rupert Lowe, I think they assumed that the old playbook was operative,
yes,
and that Rupert Lowe wouldn't be able to react and wouldn't be able to marshal his own resources as quickly as he could. But the news cycle is not dictated to by Sky News anymore. It's social media, and Rupert Lowe was instantly tweeting, and that becomes news in 10 minutes.
And it does, and that playbook has failed in many ways this time round. I think it's still, he's still relying on it, and he's now relying on the old media that like him, the people that he can feed the stories to, give the backhanders. Here's the bit on the person I next want to get out. Yeah. But you have a very valid point. I mean, again, I go back to a period of time. I've been quiet about this, and as we said, I kept my counsel on this. I've wanted to watch the party grow in a real belief that you could have an important third party out there of the right that could actually create the policies and ideas and people to challenge what I see is damaging the country. And so to say nothing, even when you saw what happened to Ben Habib, was important. But now it's really important to be able to say that is not working. And you've got a really, really important point. But somebody like myself, having seen what's happened to Ben, seen what's happened to Rupert, say, I want to be a part of this party and become an MP. Now, there are going to be those who will say, I'm going to still stand. I'll still stand. I think I can get a seat.
Yeah.
And once I've got a seat, it doesn't matter what Nigel says. He can fire me because I've got those 5 years and my name's on the paper and I've got XY MP and I've got my own team, and what a big ego. That's an ego. That's an ego. You're doing it for yourself. You're not really doing it for the people. Some of it genuinely are. But if you've got talent, you're going to look at this and go, do I push my own personal interest just to get a seat, knowing that this can happen to me? Or I really want to make and effectuate change? There are some very important points about it, of course. Which party can get up to about 35% very quickly to be able to do this? That is crucial. If you want to be able to take on Labour, the party has to be able to do that. But I think with the right amount of money, the right amount of individuals, the right amount of marketing, the social media, then that could be a challenger party. And we can see these changing very rapidly. And where do we see this? Europe. New parties have come up and rose, and some have fallen very, very quickly. Ours is a very different politics to that of Europe because of first past the post and getting the message out to lots of people. But your idea of that groundswell of younger people, middle-aged people, or people like me in the local coffee shop that I have, who are willing to vote reform, but they won't vote for reform with Nigel at the front. And that's not just a small group. In my group, there's probably about 6 or 7 people who really would like to, but they won't. They just won't with him because they don't feel quite right with him.
The lads installing my sofa this morning, because, we in politics, the lads installing my sofa.
Oh, right.
We in politics sort of, crowdsource our bellwether by talking to tradies and cab drivers and things like that, right? Yeah. Very grounded folks. They don't pay their license fee because they don't watch the BBC.
That's right.
They watch alternative media stuff, and they only listen to digital radio and things like that. And they were talking about this scuffle within Reform, and they said, yeah, we like Nigel, but we're not really having that. There's an intuitive sense of fairness that people have. When this is brought to their attention, even if you seem to have political pixie dust for the moment, all it took is for a couple of people to stop believing in Tinkerbell and she didn't have the magic anymore. And that is possible. Instead, if you are, let's say that Farage is the presumptive king of the right, let's stretch this analogy out. If he starts acting like King John, ignoring his barons, focusing only on one fiefdom, excluding all of the other territories in his kingdom, letting them go to rack and ruin, eventually a bunch of people are going to get together and draft a Magna Carta, right, and constrain that right to rule. And I think that's what's being seen here, is that he's left a certain amount of alternative media personalities, a certain amount of frontline MPs, a certain amount of people that you could appoint as political appointees if you gained control of the civil service, which you need to do by drafting legislation, which again, concrete policy output has been lacking. So you need that on day one, so you don't become Trump term 1, you become Trump term 2. Having left all that on the table, if all of that talent, that latent talent, were to pile into one party, and all of the other voting constituencies they haven't seized upon, they've seized upon the farmers a little bit, sure, but they haven't captured the sort of mums that were attracted by RFK in the States. They haven't really captured the Zoomers as much as they could because they haven't got a youth division. If they capture all of that, and they capture all of that talent, you might be able to form something together that presents a viable challenger, if not just to Reform, but to the dominant hegemon.
I agree with that, because when you look at the history of politics, people saying about Nigel being about King John, or maybe as a Caesar, and someone's waiting to get all their senators behind to finally put the knife in the back of him, which some people would really enjoy. They say, well, no one's got the kind of, the view, the look of him. He's there, he's been there for such a long time. But John F. Kennedy, he didn't have it. No one really knew about Kennedy. Kennedy's dad, maybe, but Kennedy was capable of bringing the money together for the new vehicle, television. Television was what really launched Kennedy out. So we're looking at the alternatives of individuals and characters who can go off to those different areas of the country and the different constituents of people. Then we now have the new age of social media to be able to elevate that really rapidly. And with the right people, the right message and the right characteristics, you're not those people who are currently sitting there going, oh, I hope I'm clinging on to the tails. I'm not very good, or I might be reasonably okay. I'm going to wait for that opportunity. They're going to be swept aside by those who really do have the view, that really have the talent, and really have the capability.
J.D. Vance wasn't the senator until 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
He became VP. He is now phenomenal in every interview you put him out, and seems to be just the presumptive heir apparent to Trumpism. And it's all because nobody could predict this talent rising up through the ranks. Nobody could have foreseen the political conditions that, Trump getting shot in the ear that propels him back into the White House proper. And nobody could have thought that J.D. Vance is as good on Twitter, replying to people and race-sharing them as he would have been. So,
and the other thing that J.D. Vance has that Trump has peculiarly that Farage doesn't, even though in most people's minds I think they assume that Trump has more of an ego than Farage, is that Trump is a bit more magnanimous. And if people have dissed him in the past, provided they make the possibility of reconciliation is never entirely ruled out. And I mean, J.D. Vance himself was a never Trumper who called Trump a fascist in 2015, and now he's vice president. That's far harsher language than Rupert Lowe used when he was being interviewed by Andrew Pierce in the Daily Mail, which appears to have sparked off. Well, I'm sure it was probably sparked a little earlier than that, actually, but certainly prompted the reform operatives to kick the assassination plan into being. The assassination of Rupert Lowe plan into being, as it were. So one question I do have, do you think that Farage is teachable and can be educated and can be brought around in any way whatsoever? Because I suppose one of the presuppositions of Rupert giving that interview to Andrew Pierce in critiquing Farage was that it might have an effect on his behaviour. Do you think that Rupert, to that extent at least, made a kind of tactical misjudgment there, whatever we might think of the substance of his criticisms, in believing that Farage was teachable?
And sadly, I don't think Nigel is teachable on that. I think if he was teachable, it would be for the political sense for those who are wise enough to have said, ignore this, accept it, and let's just move on because of the sake of the party. And you're right about Trump. I was fortunate to be able to go to the Trump inauguration in 2016. Why? Because my friends were massive fundraisers for Trump, and one would actually been in communications with Kellyanne Conway at the time. So I was able to go up and see that. And I remember the kind of, I suppose, dismissal of me, because Nigel was having a party, one of the famous hotels, just overlooks the White House. And I remember Aaron Banks calling me up, knowing I was there. He said, why don't you come along to the party? Farage come along and said, I got a telephone call about 20 minutes later saying, oh, no, Nigel doesn't want you there, so don't come. So that's the kind of pettiness that you see. And when you look at Trump has built a team of people from Kennedy, to Tulsi Gabbard, and then it has selected individuals along the way that can rise up with this ideology, the view that we can move on for Trumpism or MAGA, whatever the view is, but with J.D. Vance on there. And he's accepted exactly that point, that people do have different views, don't always agree with me, but we've come to some entente cordiale, or a recognition that we're all moving together in the same direction. That's the skill of Trump. His team this time is wholly different to the team. Nigel's team is the same as Brexit Party, is the same as UKIP. You might have some different individuals, in Zia being the chairman, but it's the same type of chairman as they had before. Do as you want, keep you in power, make everybody else go away.
Trump is currently sharing the limelight with this century's answer to Charles Babbage, like in the person of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It shouldn't be that difficult to realise that this is going to reflect well on you if good people want to be around you.
Bask in the glow of other people's talents and skill, because people will look at you and say, you are just sheer brilliant for bringing in that brilliance.
And so I suppose, are you interested in getting back into frontline politics, and would you join a party set up hypothetically, and I really do mean this, by the way, for the audience, I have no insider knowledge here. I have hypothetically set up by, say, Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib.
I've worked on just keeping immigration going and providing numbers whenever I can on a very low and small budget, because I think that's an important area. Partly because I've never really been involved in the political part since 2019 and being an independent MEP, because there was no one out there for me to go to. Really. So if there is a political party that forms, that has the right kind of ideas and mentality and people, a collegiate atmosphere, a view where you've got the energy to be able to create policies, a genuine belief that those people out in our country who've been let down, left behind, ignored, has someone that truly wants to help them, truly wants to get these things through, then I'll be willing there to help them along. I'd be getting involved tomorrow. I would forsake all the other problems that I've had in being able to be on the outside of things. But I genuinely need to believe that they believe in Britain, believe in the people, and believe in change If I think they're going to do it for their own ego, just for the money, I'm not interested. I'm only interested if those millions of people that have been totally ignored and are crying out for someone with hope and aspiration and a belief in them, I'll be there.
I think we'll end on that resounding note. Steven Woolfe, thank you so much for joining us on Deprogrammed. It's
Okay.
a privilege.
Thank you.
Connor, thank you very much, as always.
Thank you.
You've been watching Deprogrammed. Do make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you'd like to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization. And our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.